Thank you very much for inviting me. I've learned a lot by listening to the two previous presentations and also in particular to the discussion. I think the discussion is often the most important part of these proceedings. I'm going to just offer a few reflections on I see the question that's on the table, or the main question, which is the question of a constitutional prohibition on blasphemy, as raising complex questions about the place of religion in the public life of democracies, especially when citizens in these democracies hold a plurality of perspectives in relation to religion, or in relation to God more specifically, including the view that God doesn't exist. So I think in Ireland today there is a plurality of perspectives in relation to God. So and these are issues on which it's important to reflect. I'm speaking here in my capacity as a philosopher, in particular my capacity as a social and political philosopher, so somebody who writes on issues that she considers to be socially and politically relevant. I'm going to use just one piece of philosophical jargon, or term of art, if you like, and that's the word ethics. So when I speak about the ethical or ethics, I'm using it in a sense derived in a loose sense from Aristotle. I'm using it to refer. I'm using the term ethics to mean the doctrine of human flourishing, what it means to lead a good life as a human being. And going a little bit beyond Aristotle, I think questions of what it is to lead a good life as a human being cannot be separated from the question of the kind of society that would enable human beings to lead a good life. So ethics, by ethics I mean human flourishing. What is it to lead a good life as a human being? What kind of society enables human beings to live that good life? I think that's my only piece of philosophical jargon. Now, philosophers are reflective people. Philosophy is a reflective discipline. So I have to start by reflecting a little bit on what philosophy can contribute to public affairs. I think that's a very important question. There's a variety of positions on it. I'm giving you my position. I think philosophy can serve as a kind of as a very general guide. It can offer orientation, indicate directions, but only at a pretty high level of abstraction. So in my view, philosophy, even social and political philosophy, should abstain from making specific pronouncements on matters of public policy. It should abstain from specifics. In the present case, we're talking about the Constitution. And the Constitution is a document that operates at a high level of abstraction. This is one reason why I've been reflecting on this question for the question of whether there should be a constitutional prohibition on blasphemy for the last number of weeks, and I surprised myself by coming to the conclusion that philosophy can actually take quite a specific position on this, and I think, and I'll be upfront about the position, which is my position, which is that there should not be a constitutional prohibition on blasphemy. But I think I need to say more than that. So the reason that I think philosophy can come to that conclusion is because of a second important point I want to make about philosophy's contribution to public affairs, which is that the voice of the philosopher, in this case me, but of any philosopher, is not impartial. So we, as philosophers, we always speak from a particular position. We have a particular vision of ethics, in other words, a particular vision of human flourishing, of what it is to lead a good life as human beings, and of the kind of society that would enable it. So I am speaking as a philosopher. I'm speaking from a particular position. This is unavoidable. I think I just have to be upfront about the elements of the picture of the good life that's informing my answer. So I'm going to tell you the two elements that I think lead in the direction of not making, of not including a prohibition on blasphemy in the Constitution. The two elements which inform my picture of what it is to flourish as a human being and the kind of society we need in order to enable that human flourishing, the two key elements are, firstly, that every human being is deserving of respect as an ethical agent. And by this I mean we have to respect every single human being, among other things, by virtue of their capacity to form and pursue their own views of what it is to lead a good life and to develop the kind of society that would allow them to do that. So every human being is, in my view, a distinctive ethical agent. They have we should respect them as a human being who is free in the sense of able to form and pursue their own views of what it is to lead a good life. That's the first element. I think every human being is deserving of respect as an ethical agent in this sense. The second element is that I think the principles, the legal and political principles governing or constituting the state should be acceptable to all citizens, acceptable in principle to all citizens, certainly the very general ones that are enshrined in the Constitution. So if you take those two elements, the first element being that every human being is worthy or is deserving of respect as somebody who is capable of forming and pursuing their own ideas of what it is to lead a good life, you combine that with the view that the general laws and principles constituting the state should be acceptable to everybody, and you add in a third contingent point, which is there is a plurality of perspectives as to what the good life is in Irish democracy and many contemporary democracies, then I think you have to say there is no room for a constitutional prohibition on blasphemy, because blasphemy makes sense, as we've heard earlier, it makes sense only in relation to a belief in God. And unless, if it is the case that there are people there are citizens of the Irish state whose view of the good life does not include a belief in God, then we would be failing to respect their ethical agency if we were to include a constitutional prohibition on blasphemy. So this seems to me clear. You can dispute my proposal that there should not be a prohibition on blasphemy in the Constitution by disputing any of the two elements, either of the two elements I mentioned, that we should respect human beings as ethical agents, free and able to develop and pursue their own ideas of what it is to lead a good life, and that the second element being that laws and principles constituting the state should be acceptable to everybody. You can dispute those, but if you accept those, then I think it's hard to avoid coming to the conclusion that I'm suggesting to you. However, I don't think that's the end of the story, because you're not just being asked to make a choice between yes or no as regards a prohibition on blasphemy in the Constitution. There are various options. I think the question of blasphemy is an important question that should be debated in many contexts of public life in Ireland today. And I think it's important. Well, I'll try and give you a sense of why I think it's important by referring to two other important elements of the vision of human flourishing that informs my thinking as a social and political philosopher. So I've mentioned 2 already, but there's 2 more. And I think the first one in particular is something that's relevant to our discussion today. This third part of my picture of what it is to lead a good life is that human beings are social animals. Now, that's not a very controversial statement, but I interpret that in a fairly strong sense to mean that that my human flourishing as an individual human being is inextricably tied to the human flourishing of other people. Now, this idea has been expressed in many ways, often in terms of freedom. We were reminded recently of Martin Luther King's famous I Have a Dream speech. It was the 50th anniversary on the 28th of August this year of Martin Luther King's speech, which he gave in the context of the March on Washington in 1963. And in that speech, Martin Luther King, referring to the white his white brothers, as he puts it, who were part of the march on Washington, he says, they have come to see that their freedom is inextricably linked to our freedom. So the white brothers have come to see that their freedom as white people is inextricably linked to our freedom as black people. But exactly the same sentiment was articulated by Marx in the Communist Manifesto when he says the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. And I think this means that if religious believers suffer because of offensive material, because of expression, public expression, that is a cause of suffering for them, then it is a cause of concern to all citizens in the state, whatever their religious beliefs may be, or irrespective of whether they have any religious beliefs. So I think I think blasphemy does raise issues of public concern. I think we should be talking about it, but I don't think that for the reasons I mentioned earlier, that there is a case for making a prohibition on blasphemy a part of the Constitution. That's probably, there was a fourth element, which I think I'll just throw out into the room. I'm not going to have time to develop it, but the fourth element of my picture of what it is to flourish as a human being, which informs my social and political philosophizing, which I think is relevant, but I won't have time to say very much about it, is that I think religious believers, in all their plurality, can learn from each other, but they can also learn from non-believers, and religious non-believers can learn from religious believers. And I think with regard to blasphemy, which seems to me inextricably bound up with a belief in God, as I said, I think religious non-believers can learn something about the power of representations, about the power of naming for good and for evil, that is implicit in the very concept of blasphemy. So I think we should be all receptive to the idea that blasphemy is an important concept. It should be explored, and I can certainly see ways in which the concept of blasphemy, even if one does not believe in God, in which it offers us a view of the world and human beings' place in the world that can be enriching. So thank you for your attention.